It's great to see everyone. And just to say a few words about B'nai B'rith Colorado before we begin, as Gabriel mentioned, I am working with B'nai B'rith Colorado and my husband, Frank Goldman, since the pandemic started on a COVID initiative, which has helped to bring PPE and food to those who need it most during this extraordinarily challenging time. So we are very proud of that effort and would invite you to check that out on our website, on the B'nai B'rith Colorado website. Thank you so much to Representative Sirota again for joining us today as we all remember the 82nd anniversary of Kristallnacht today, and with all of the news around increased anti-Semitism and rising challenges for education during the pandemic, many of us in the Jewish community are particularly focused on how to ensure that future generations do not forget the lessons of the Holocaust. Unsurprisingly, there is a lot of work to do. A 2018 survey of 1,350 Americans by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany found that 68% of respondents said that anti-Semitism is present in America today. 51% of respondents agree that there are many or a great deal of neo-Nazis in the United States today. And 66% of millennial respondents could not identify Auschwitz. We have so much work to do, but we are so proud of the work that has already begun here in Colorado. We are honored to have Representative Emily Sirota here today, a co-prime sponsor of the bill, as Gabriel introduced earlier. Representative Sirota will provide us with a firsthand account of how Colorado joined the dozen US states that have enacted legislation to require Holocaust and genocide studies in public schools. Our objective with our time today is, as mentioned, to delve into the history, context, and future of this important law, and also to show how we hope this will change the way kids think about others and interact when they are better informed, more empathetic, and more compassionate towards others. I would now like to officially introduce Representative Sirota. Emily was elected in 2018 as a state representative for Colorado House District 9 and was reelected to office this past week. Emily serves on the Energy and Environment Committee as well as the State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee. Emily is also a social worker and a proud progressive Democrat with years of experience working in government and in the Southeast Denver community. Emily's interest and focus on education has certainly been a highlight throughout her career. In fact, I first met Representative Sirota when she was a director at Rabbi Stephen Foster Early Learning Center at Temple Emmanuel. Emily received her BA in political science at Indiana University and her Master of Social Work from the University of Denver. She previously worked with Colorado nonprofits on healthcare and civic engagement issues, and in 2011, she ran for Denver School Board to protect public education. During her time in government, Representative Sirota served as a policy aide to a Democratic US Senator, a Democratic Congressman, and a Democratic Governor. In those roles, she worked on healthcare and budget policy and helped oversee a program to help expand healthcare benefits for workers and small businesses. Emily is married to reporter David Sirota, and they are the proud parents of 2 young children and their dog Monty. So thank you for joining us again today, and we would like to begin, Representative Sirota, with, if you could please give us a high altitude introduction to HB20-1336.
Thank you so much, Margo and Gabriel. I am grateful to have the opportunity to join you here today to talk about this legislation and its future in Colorado. I think that you really framed well the impetus for bringing such a bill, that public understanding even of what the Holocaust was is at such a low, and also noting the passing of Fanny Starr, I think just really reinforces our desire to ensure that we are teaching our youngest Coloradans about the Holocaust and genocides around the globe, so that they not only have an understanding of history, so that we don't repeat it, but also so that we are building within our children empathy and tolerance and understanding about when is it important to stand up and speak up. And I think observing what has gone on even around our country in the last few years, I think just outlines how critically important it is now more than ever that we move this forward. So there were a number of folks who came together. Fanny and Helen Starr invited me to their home, and I was joined by Margo and other community leaders to talk about could this be the year that we introduce such legislation. There was interest from the Armenian community in Colorado as well to work on a bill that would highlight genocide studies. And I think we all came to the conclusion that now is the time for all the reasons that have been listed. And I think that, and so we set about creating a very uniquely Coloradan piece of legislation, understanding that I believe at the time about 12 other states also had some kind of a requirement for Holocaust and genocide education in their state. And we set about crafting a bill that would fit with Colorado's unique structures to ensure that all of our K-12 students would receive such an education. And I'm happy to get into more detail about, how that is uniquely Coloradan, but maybe I'll let you steer that conversation, Margo.
It's definitely on my list. We have a unique system here in Colorado for sure. But first, I think a lot of us are wondering, how did you manage to pass the law unanimously? That is such an amazing feat. So please tell us how that happened.
Well, I think that I must give credit to a tremendous team of people who worked so hard to make this a reality. And I don't think that we can give credit to one specific person or another. We all worked hard to make this happen. And I think that there were a handful of factors that really contributed to that. One is, the trip that the JCRC hosts to Israel, these bipartisan trips, I think laid some really important groundwork for ensuring that there was a bipartisan foundation of understanding and need, that once one visits Yad Vashem, once one takes this trip, you can no longer look away. And so I think that was critical in starting the snowball of building a bipartisan group that would help move this legislation forward. That one of the bill sponsors was Senator Heisey, a Republican, and from there we worked hard to listen to everyone's concerns, ensure that we were still living within the local control mandate of Colorado education, respecting the differences across the state while still outlining a foundation for which this bill could be implemented in Colorado. And then Jeannie and Moira were the two lobbyists employed to work on this bill, and I think they did a lot of great work across the aisles and across chambers. And then truly in the House, I spent a long time having individual conversations with each member, and you should know it's not a small thing. It takes a long time, and we're all running multiple pieces of legislation, and everybody has to, work on each different bill, but this bill truly was a priority for me. And so I spent a lot of time speaking individually to each and every member of the House chamber, listening to any concerns they had and asking them to co-sponsor the bill. And I think given the current conditions in our country, that and the willingness of some Republicans to join on from the start helped us to build that momentum. And with each conversation and each additional person joining on to co-sponsor the bill before it was introduced, we were able to introduce a bill with 80 co-sponsors out of 100 members of the General Assembly. And I think that the credit goes to the number of people having conversations and working with all of the members across the aisle, and being respectful of people's concerns, and really an understanding from our members about the goal and the need for the legislation. And so ultimately, when the bill was able to pass out of its first committee with unanimous support, that set it up well for the House floor, and we were able to pass it unanimously at the House floor, and then it just moved that much quicker over in the Senate. And I just am so grateful for the community support that went into to making this possible. It's not just one person; it's always the act of many to achieve such a tremendous outcome.
Well, thank you. That was a wonderful story to hear about how this all came to be and how everyone worked together so wonderfully. Speaking of local control in Colorado, can you tell us a bit more about what makes this legislation unique in Colorado, how education mandates work within the context of local control in Colorado?
I would say that Colorado is somewhat unique in that we, when it comes to education, we heavily favor local control. And what that means is we have 181 school districts in the state of Colorado. And so at the state level, the Colorado Department of Education works to set standards for what our children are expected to learn and become proficient in, and what our educators are expected to do sort of on a base level. And then it is up to each individual school district to implement curriculum and determine the way in which they will teach those standards. And there's a tremendous amount of power given to local school boards and administrations to do this work. And so that differs. For example, Maryland, everything happens, it's very concentrated at the state level, and policy is truly directed through the state. And we are sort of the flip side of that. So it's not that the state has no role in our standards and public education, but it is certainly less directed by the state, and oftentimes more in a supportive role. And so we had to make sure that in order to gain unanimous bipartisan support for the bill, we had to make sure that we were respecting local districts' ability to implement the bill as they saw fit. So what the bill does is the Colorado Department of Education will set out standards for how for what this looks like, for what would meet the standard of teaching Holocaust and genocide education as a requirement of high school graduation. And it will be up to each local district to determine how they will implement that, in what kind of a class, what kind of, what grade level, choosing the curriculum. And that is why we have set up within the legislation a resource bank that will be built to supply to supply districts with basically ready-made curriculum for them to be able to use, that has been vetted, that we know is appropriate, um, that is truly true information, and then they can select from there. But it is really going to be up to those local districts to implement the bill, and that can be hard for folks. And I should note that this was landmark legislation in that we rarely change our standards. It is a really, really big deal in Colorado to change our public education standards. And so that, given the fact that Holocaust and genocide education has been added to the standards, everyone should know that that is a huge accomplishment, and we should really take heart in that. But the work is not done. Now that we have added it to the standards, those standards have to be built out, and then it will be up to all of us in various communities to work with our local school boards, our local education associations, to ensure that those standards are truly implemented in the way that we envision.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And if I were in the audience right now, which I feel like I'm in the audience, but it's, Zoom's a weird audience. But I think we're all thinking about COVID right now. And, I think we all want to know what effect is COVID and our recent reliance on virtual teacher training and virtual classrooms going to have on the way that the Holocaust and genocide studies are being taught in public schools across the country. What lessons do you think we can draw from the experiences of other states and other places that have been doing this, since the pandemic started, in order to optimize the implementation of the bill here in Colorado as we move towards 2021?
So I think generally right now our teachers, our educators are under immense stress and pressure. This bill notwithstanding, I think COVID has has really asked, we have asked so much of our educators in this time of a pandemic, that they are having to figure out how to educate our kids virtually, how to ensure that our kids are showing up. I mean, there are districts all across the state that that have lost kids, and they're going door to door to try and find them, and they can't find where our kids have gone. I think our educators are dealing with significant mental health challenges as they try to do their work from home and then back in person, and navigate the in between and the back and forth. So I think, and so all of that is happening at the same time that we also have passed other legislation over the last 2 years that is also putting pressure on our educators, which is one of the reasons that we pushed back the implementation date a year on the bill to 2023, to make sure that there was enough time to do the preparation work so that the standards could be created in a truly intentional way, incorporating all of our educators' input. But know that we also passed the READ Act in 2019, which is a significant change to the way in which we are teaching literacy in the state, as well as some requirements for educators around relicensure and focusing on special education and mental health. So there's a lot that has been added to educators' plates, and I think that they are feeling incredibly stressed right now on a whole host of fronts. I think that the committee, the standards committee that has been put together, that will help inform what goes into the resource bank and help craft the standards, will there are educators excuse me, educators on that community. I think one of the things that we can do best, and what other states have done successfully, is to rely on the educators that have already been doing this work, because this is not, of course, a new idea. And we have some incredible educators here in the state of Colorado who have been doing this work and have those classroom experiences to be able to share best practices. For example, our Denver School Board President, Carrie Olson, Dr. Olson has been doing this work for years, has led trips of high school students. And so I think we have a wealth of resources in a human capacity here in Colorado. And I think that we should rely heavily on their experiences about what works and how to shape our work going forward.
Absolutely. Carrie Olson and also Todd Hennessy with the Colorado Holocaust Educators. Fantastic
Exactly.
resources. We are so lucky to have them here in Colorado. Well, what do you think the best outcome for the implementation of this law would be, and how would you like to see it measured?
Well, measurement is another tricky question. Testing is this is a question that we had in crafting the bill, and how would we know that it's working? And I think we shied away from that question of, do we ask test questions? And I think we know it is working when we know that in all 181 school districts have crafted their implementation plans for these studies. And when it is sort of it's a qualitative question, I think, of making sure that there's a lot of work to be done. So to be successful, to accomplish the goals that we are setting out, so that our youth are more knowledgeable, so that our youth grow skills of empathy and tolerance, and learning when to stand up and speak out. Those are sometimes intangible, but I think that if we are incredibly intentional about assisting our school districts in this implementation, if we are incredibly intentional about building our resource bank and then supporting our educators through this process, making sure that they have the resources and the training to fall back on so that they feel confident. I think if our educators can feel confident that they have the tools and the skills to do the work, then our students will benefit and they will learn and we will be successful.
Absolutely. Well, we do have a lot of opinions about how this should be optimized and implemented optimally. What do you think are sort of some of the common misperceptions that people might have about how it should be implemented, and what would you like to say to sort of try to clarify any questions that might still be outstanding in the community, and try to communicate more effectively with their communities and educators?
Well, I think this, and I'm happy to take any, more specific questions about specific concerns that anyone here has or has heard. I think that, it's a careful, balance that we will have to find in terms of Colorado being a local control state. And so each district will have a lot of leeway to implement the bill as they see fit. And so I presume that, Denver Public Schools is going to implement this in a different way than Moffat County. And I actually don't even know how many school districts exist in Moffat County. Could be one, could be five. But all that's to say that and this is the Colorado way when it comes to public education, which I think is difficult sometimes for us to really accept, when we may have opinions about what is exactly the right way to do it. That, some districts are going to say, we should be teaching this in middle school and in high school. Some districts may have a plan to, to softly introduce this in grade 5. these are the things that are going to be up to each individual district, so I think, we'd all like to get away from the idea that the way to learn the Holocaust is for all high school students to read the Diary of Anne Frank. That it is definitely, that the resources available and the ways in which we can educate students are really diverse, that it is about literacy, it is about history and social studies, and there are so many civic engagement and government classes. I mean, there are so many ways in which we can introduce this material, and it will be up to those individual districts to determine how they're going to do that. I think that is going to be a challenge for folks. And it's just something that we're going to have to continue to work through district by district.
Thank you. Yes. I think all of us at this point are also wondering, what is the best resource for people who want to dive deeper into these future discussions and next steps regarding implementation of the bill, of the law, and how can we follow along?
Well, here I will put in the chat the link to the Colorado Department of Education Standards and Instruction committee for this particular bill, and so you can see the timeline listed there. You can see all the committee members, and then there's I think there's even a link to meeting agendas and summaries, and there is another meeting that is coming up in November. So I believe the group has just met once, but there's contact information for Stephanie Hartman, who's a social studies content expert and is really the right CDE contact for this committee. And so I think that is probably the best place to just bookmark that link and check in and make sure that you put those meeting links on your calendar. And the meetings are open to the public, so you can always watch and follow along there. And I think then the notes and things should always be available if you're not able to attend those meetings in person. But that's probably the best way to follow along the process at this point.
Great. Well, those were all of my questions. Gabriel, did we get any questions from the audience that I could pose to the group? I mean, to Representative Sirota. In the meantime, I would also like to thank the Coalition Against Global Genocide and Roz Duman, and also Kavod on the Road, of course, and B'nai B'rith Colorado and B'nai B'rith International. Thank you. That's Charles Kaufman from B'nai B'rith International joining us from the East Coast. Appreciate that. And just everyone for being here today while we wait for these questions to come in. It has been quite an honor for me to be able to be involved in this process, and I am just so unbelievably proud of what Colorado has done with our leadership, with Representative Sirota and Representative Daphna Michelson-Janae, and the two co-prime sponsors of this bill in the House, and what they did to move this all the way across the finish line and into the next phase that we find ourselves in at this point. So I think in this time of such unusual abnormality, we can certainly find so many good things to think about, what we've accomplished and what we can do together when we all work together and join together. So did we get a question? I think we did.
It looks like Christy Ziegler is wondering what the pushback, if any, in getting this established was. And I think we've touched on some of the pushback and some of the reason that the bill hadn't been introduced, because it's certainly been part of a conversation for many, many years. And, as Margo mentioned, people like Roz Duman have been working on genocide studies for years and years and years, and it has certainly come up in the past. I think one concern is that Colorado does not do mandates. We don't, that is people are really allergic to that word. And so, calling them, coming to the point of determining standards became acceptable. But I think that was a barrier to get across. And I think that, how do we make this inclusive and also continue to be able to garner the wide support that we needed, was a challenge that I think we were able to meet. But I think, and just adding to the stress, and the the all that our educators have on their plates. I think, any of us who've got children in the school system now, I think it's probably pretty evident to all of us how challenging all of this has been. It's been challenging for our children. It's been challenging for us as parents, but especially also our educators um, have been asked to really go well above and beyond, as they typically do, but now in a very atypical situation. Our educators are grossly underpaid in the state of Colorado. We rank near the bottom when compared to other states, and we ask the world of our educators, and it is becoming harder and harder to recruit new educators into the profession. And I think that sometimes that is because we continue to ask so much of them while we grow our class sizes and their pay shrinks in comparison to cost of living in the state. So I think that all of those were things that gave people pause, but ultimately, we had a really excellent group of community members that was able to talk through any of the challenges that we saw, and really overcome those struggles. And I also should give credit to our now our House Speaker elect Alec Garnett, is he your representative, Margo?
Not anymore since we moved, but a
Okay.
very good friend,
So,
as you know. Yes.
So he, I think that credit should be given to him as well, because when he heard about this idea, he said, yes, I'm there. How can I help make this happen? And so, he wasn't the public face of this, but he certainly lent um, his time and his energy and his support to making sure that the bill could come to fruition. And so I think all of those things, having Senator Fenberg, who is also the Senate Majority Leader, sponsor the bill, all of these things helped us to overcome any of the struggles that would give people pause in endeavoring such a challenge here.
Absolutely. And yes, I echo the thanks to Representative Garnett for all of his behind the scenes work, to make sure that there was support throughout the process, even from the beginning. And I always appreciated talking about this initiative with him, as he seemed to understand it from the very start, and its importance. I would move, I guess, to another question. Who was first? Oh, so a number of organizations here have provided funding, the initial funding for the bill to move forward. I think mostly administrative costs were considered at the early stages. What do you think will be the funding needs going forward to make sure that the implementation succeeds, and that we get to the point where we want to be with teacher training and getting to all of the districts?
I think that's a great question. So the funding for the bill, and I must say, the other reason that we were actually able to pass this bill is because the communities came together and said, this is such a priority that we will help fundraise the approximately $12,000 that was determined the state would need to do the work to create the standards and operate that standards committee. So that That's not necessarily the work of funding specific resources and training. So that is a separate question, but we were able to get the bill passed in the time of COVID, when bills that had a fiscal impact on the state were being killed left and right. We were able to pass this bill because the communities came together to come up with the $12,000 we needed to get us this start. Going forward, I think it has certainly been said that in order for this work to be successful, our educators need the training, and they need the support to make sure that they are confident in what they are teaching. And I think that so part of that is really building that resource bank so that our educators know where they can access both curriculum and training opportunities, which do exist. And I think this will be something that we will have to continue to work on in our communities about how we are going about supporting local districts in connecting our teachers with those resources so that they can feel confident and competent in what they're doing. But that will be a little bit down the road.
Is there anything in the materials about differentiating fact from misinformation? So I guess the question is, how is the bill going to be implemented in a way that makes sure that there's not, crazy misrepresentations of facts being taught in school districts?
I think that's still that's a struggle that perhaps comes up not just on this subject, but others as well, when sometimes we need some help separating fact from fiction. I think that was one of the goals of the resource bank, is having CDE overseeing that resource bank, so that that is really the place where we know that materials have been vetted, and that we can feel confident that what is in there is appropriate for teaching. That said, that will still require, I think, some monitoring to know how exactly different districts are implementing the legislation, and making sure that misinformation doesn't sneak in. And some that's not necessarily. I mean, that is I think not unique necessarily to this issue, but can happen on a host of issues, and typically with I would expect that might be more on a sort of individual level, maybe with individual educators, not necessarily from a district curriculum perspective, but still something that we will have to continue to monitor.
Next question. In 2019, the General Assembly passed HB 1192, which called for the inclusion of teaching minority histories in the K through 12 education. Is there any sort of evaluation measure being developed for that bill that we might be able to use in gauging the effectiveness of HB 20-1336?
That's a great question, Joseph. And I actually don't know the answer to that, but am interested to find out. I think that, that bill called for kind of a commission to come together and explore, and I don't know how far they've actually gotten in their work in terms of gauging effectiveness, but that too, I think, that will be implemented differently in different districts. And so again, the way that Denver or Jeffco schools decide to implement that will be really different from Otero County and other places. So I think that is a good question to look to how they are, if they are developing any evaluation measures, or if it is more of a advisory group for local districts. So I will get back to you on that question.
Okay, great. And I think the last question we have is, about a couple of bills in California. It's AB 331 and AB 1460. Are you familiar with either of those bills?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with either of those bills specifically. We did take some time to look through the different legislation that have been passed in different states around the country to take from, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, but that we are, I think that, but I don't remember specifically taking from California legislation. Um, but I'm happy to hear if there are any useful pieces of those pieces of legislation in terms of implementation and provision of resources.
Are there outside organizations that have had success in implementing similar laws in other states? And will Colorado be working with those organizations and seeking their assistance? For example, Yad Vashem, Echoes and Reflections. I think there's some interest in hearing more about that.
Yes, I think absolutely. This will be, part of the work of the standards committee. They will be advising on building that resource bank, and I know that there has already been conversation and outreach with different places like Echoes and Reflections in terms of participation there. So I would say most certainly.
Great. Yes, I think there are a lot of models out there in other states. I would agree. Colorado, as Representative Sirota mentioned and explained, is very unique, and so there are some things we can do and some things we can't do. But certainly a lot of information out there and a lot of interested parties helping to research that and to bring it all together and make sure that we have the best plan, and we know we have the best leadership. So we are just so happy that this has come to fruition. And if anyone has any more questions, I think we're out of questions, and we might be ready to. Oh, I got one more question. All right, last question. Have we gotten a timeline for the implementation? I think there's a timeline.
Yes, so the bill outlined a rough timeline that I think on or before July 1st of 2021, the Holocaust and Genocide Committee will make recommendations for the adoption of standards to the State Board of Education. And then on or before July 2021, the Colorado Department of Education will have also created the resource bank with guidance from that committee of experts. And then on or before July 1st of 2023, local school districts must incorporate the adopted Holocaust and Genocide standards into a course required for high school graduation. So right now, what is really happening is that these committee members are coming together and meeting. And like I said, I think their next meeting is scheduled for this month. They will come together and do that work to inform those recommendations before July 1st of 2021. So they've got, what is that, 7 months, 7.5 months.
Great. Well, I think that's the last question. Thank you again, Representative Sirota, for your time and sharing all of this very helpful information and uplifting information, so we can all be more involved and more informed about what happened and what's going to happen. Thank you again to Vote on the Road and Gabriel Sanders for putting this together. Thank you to Frank Goldman at B'nai B'rith, Colorado. And thank you all for joining us today. We are so much looking forward to seeing you all again and working together in the days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really wonderful to join you all. I put my email in the chat. It's repemilysirota@gmail.com. So please, anyone, feel free to reach out to me going forward on this issue or any other. I'm always happy to hear from you, but also happy to follow up with any questions that you might have had.